Welcome to Pharmacy View podcast, where we provide regular interviews with pharmacists and key people within the Australian pharmacy and associated industry. In this stream of podcast episodes, we discuss aspects of technology or business operation and how each area interacts with guests' current role or pharmacy-related business. I'm your host, Scott Carpenter, and my guest today is proudly brought to you by Shopfront Solutions for all your digital, shelf and marketing needs, part of the Arian Technologies Group. G'day everybody, and it's great to have you listening to us today, and I'd like to, with a lot of excitement, take this opportunity to introduce to you a pharmacist that I've got to know for quite a few years who is joining the Pharmacy View podcast team. So welcome, Pharmacist Michael Alexander.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you. And I'm going to take this opportunity, since I'm a newbie, to turn the spotlight on you and ask you a few questions, if you don't mind.
No problems with that at all. Let's be interested to see how we go with this. And again, hopefully the podcast editors can make sure that I don't waffle on for too long.
Yeah, well, they may have a lot of work to do, but we'll see how we go. Let me start by asking you a little bit about your own background, how you came to have such a long and dare I say, distinguished career in the retail pharmacy industry.
Thanks, Michael. I will try and keep the 40-year plus career history as short as I possibly can, but it is a little bit of an interesting story, and I'm happy to kind of share as to how I got to where I am today. But reality is, and some people are aware of this, but many probably not, I'm actually a furniture maker by trade training, interestingly enough. And I guess when you've had over 40 years of a career history, there's a whole lot of things that have happened in that time to get to where I am today. In terms of where I am today, and I'll jump back to fill in the middle sections in a minute, but I'm semi-retired these days after having a very, what I would like to think, successful career in pharmacy, amongst other things. And when I say semi-retired, I spend as much time as I can health and fitness, hiking the Victorian high country these days, or as much as I can. I obviously spend a little bit of time with this podcast, and really enjoy that in terms of staying affiliated with the pharmacy industry. I still do provide some consulting into the pharmacy industry, both with individual pharmacists, some pharmacy groups and some pharmacy head offices from an operations, business financials, marketing perspective. So that's all kind of going on. But more excitingly, I think for me personally, is that through what I call the unprecedented years recently, an opportunity came up. And again, having a trade background in somewhat building and construction, I've currently do quite a bit of work for elderly couples in my local area. And what I mean by that is that these elderly couples are quite scared, would be the right word, about going into aged care facilities at the moment, because during that 2 years of COVID, they were the places you didn't want to be. So whereas previously you might have sold your home and moved into a village or a facility, elderly couples in my area anyway don't want to do that anymore. And so a few of them reached out to me, and I, on a part-time basis, do what's called custom property maintenance. And what that means is that where the couple aren't able to do and look after their property anymore, I might go in one day a month for quite a few elderly couples and actually just help them maintain their property, handrails for mobility, ramps, could be changing light globes, it could be changing smoke detector batteries. And to be honest with you, I actually get a lot of kick out of that because I like helping people as well from that perspective. In addition to that, I think it's important I talk about my two sons. And one is actually a tech head. So he's a senior tech developer with REA, being Real Estate Australia. He and I would talk every week. And what do we talk about? I'll call it career and leadership coaching is what I give him, because he's well and truly into the corporate world, a place that I've spent many, many years. And we would talk often about his experiences, his times, his own development from that perspective. I have another son who is actually a registered master builder Victoria, maybe somewhat lived the life that I didn't get to live. So occasionally I get called off the bench to go and help him build houses, which again, I don't mind that as well, because I'm certainly in my current years doing everything I can in terms of my health and my fitness for somewhat longevity from that perspective. Now, if I try and fill in between the two, trained as a cabinet maker, furniture maker, to spend quite a few years in the pharmacy industry. Well, I came out of my trade training in the 80s, and for anyone that might be old enough to remember that, there was a building recession on at that point in time, and couldn't get a full-time job in the building construction industry for love nor money. And I'd been working part-time at my local Woolies, and they actually offered me a management traineeship, which I took, more probably pressured from my parents at the time to do something. And whilst I won't say necessarily the rest is history, but I guess I spent the next 20 years in what I'll call fast-moving consumer goods, management training, financial training, business training, even down to profit and loss, cash flow training across those arenas for Woolworths. I spent a few years also with Coles, Myer, Target, and towards the end of that time, I actually spent quite a few years with the Mitre 10 organisation. So that's, I guess, given me my introduction then to independent business operations. And there came a day where most people would know that Bunnings took over Australia in terms of the hardware industry. And I wouldn't necessarily say I saw writing on the wall, but I guess I came to the conclusion that in terms of what independent hardware looked like, it was going to change significantly, and maybe I'd had a good run and what else was out there. And I applied for another job with another international organisation. I came down to being one of two final candidates through a recruitment company, and the recruitment company rang me one day and they said, look, probably not the answer that you wanted to hear. You haven't got this job, but if it's any consolation, the other person didn't get it either. The international companies decided to bring someone into Australia from their American operation. Now, interestingly enough, that organisation actually doesn't exist anywhere in the world today. It's a brand that disappeared in the last 20 years. But from that interaction, the recruitment company came to me and said, look, have you ever thought about a career in pharmacy? And I said, I kind of laughed a bit like that. And I said, well, actually, no, I can't say that I have, but why would you ask? And they said, well, interestingly enough, we've got a pharmacy group based in South Australia that are looking for a retailer, someone with business management, someone with people leadership, to actually help them expand their business. And so that was my introduction and foray into Pharmacy Australia over 20 years ago with the National Pharmacies Group based in South Australia. And I remember meeting the then CEO, Managing Director, Jim Howard, and Tina Hudson, the General Manager of HR. And I'm generally quite honest with people, and I said to them, look, I have to be honest with you. I don't know a lot about pharmacy. I don't visit the doctor that often. I don't get a script filled that often. So I know they're there. I know they're existing. And I don't want to be something that you think that I am. And interestingly enough, their response to me was, that's okay. We're not looking for someone with pharmacy experience. We're looking for someone with retail business experience, because we need that in terms of what we need to do to grow and develop our business. We'll teach you pharmacy. Our pharmacists will teach you pharmacy. And I have to say that first 8 years with National Pharmacies, which some of you would be aware of, is a friendly society model where the pharmacies are owned by the friendly society. So they are fully managed pharmacies. And there was quite an introduction to me from having to actually interact and manage pharmacists, because I'd never done that in my time. I went on a very, very steep and fast learning curve. I met some magnificent people through that time and through the entire 20 years in pharmacy. And even today I'm meeting great people as well. But to a point, none of them ostracized me. None of them looked down at me. Most of them actually helped and coached and guided me. And so to a point today, my understanding of the pharmacy industry is not what I brought to the table at that time, but actually what pharmacists and pharmacy industry people have shown and coached me on over 20 years. So I guess that's where I've been. After National Pharmacies, I spent a period of time with Terry White Chemists, which is where you and I met, Michael. And when that time came to an end, I spent quite a few years then with the Pharmacy Alliance Group as well. And again, all of them have given me great interaction across the pharmacy industry in every state of Australia. And there would be people maybe listening today that wondering where I was. Well, this is where I am today. Not necessarily in the latter part of my career, but having had a great career, just on a slightly different tangent. So that's me, Michael, as short as I could possibly make, 40 plus years.
I mean, it's really fascinating. And I actually want to ask you a follow-up question, if you don't mind. You've worn so many hats, right? Builder, pharmacy, consultant, podcaster, dad. Is there a secret to being good at lots of different things in your mind, or are you just kind of taking it as it comes?
No, I think for people that know me intimately, I have a brain that doesn't easily stop. And what I mean by that is that, and again, some people might be able to relate to this, some people may not, but I drive my wife crazy because I cannot sit still. Would be, and where I could and should be probably kind of sitting down and maybe doing nothing at the moment. The fact that I'm actually doing 5 or 6 or 7 things at the one time drives some people crazy. So I guess to a point, it's the way I'm wired, Michael. As I said, I think people need to be careful with that because not everyone is wired like that. I on several occasions did the personality testing that maybe quite a few of us have done, and depending on the mood on the day and how mischievous I wanted to be, I could be an extrovert, I could be an introvert, but I think the reality is that I probably sit like quite a few people somewhere in between. There are days when I go into myself and just ponder. There's days where I actually like working on a building site with my son and just doing physical labour. There's days where actually I like being on a site with other people and interacting with other people. So each to their own to a point. But I guess in my case, it's what has made me over time. I could have to a point fostered it, but I think I've just taken opportunities as they've come.
Well, I mean, congratulations on your success and your son's success as well. I mean, it's a varied and fascinating career. And, let's take advantage of that nonstop brain of yours and ask you another question. Right?
Sure.
So it's fair to say, for what you've told us, that you've been around the block a few times. And especially in pharmacy, you've seen multiple disruptions within the sector throughout the years. I myself can remember when I was working as a pharmacist, the launch of generic medications and the rise of the discounters and price disclosure as sort of the 3 big industry earthquakes during the time when I was practicing. So how have successful pharmacies, in your opinion, weathered those past disruptions? What strategies have they implemented to remain competitive and financially viable? Do you see a theme?
Yeah, look, absolutely. And there's a couple, I guess, that stand out for me that we're no doubt going to talk about in this next period of time. I'm going to wrap it up under the term adaptability. Now, this, I have to say, is not unique to the pharmacy industry. And I've been, and I also need to be very careful at the moment because, look, right today here in Australia, the Australian pharmacy industry is going through a change process that I'm pretty sure is one of the most significant, both operationally and financially, that I can recall. The change to 60-day dispensing is disrupting the pharmacy industry. There's no doubt about that. Now, there's a lot of discussion around the financial impact on this, the ability to provide quality healthcare to clients, customers, and patients. And I'll be honest with you, I'm still reading and I'm still digesting what it looks like. Now, is it fair to say that the pharmacy industry will survive? I think yes is the easy answer to that. Will it look like in 12 months' time what it looks like today? Potentially yes. Will there be some casualties along the way? I'm thinking yes, there potentially will be, because as with most government decisions, and I've seen this in the building industry as well, decisions are made, I guess, for a future development of the economy and the people of the land. And to a point, there is some risk assessment in making this decision, in making this change. There will be some carnage, there will be some wreckage along the way, and ultimately the decision will be based on is the improvement or the change going to have a greater impact than the amount of carnage we're going to get. And I've got to be honest with you, I think that's where we're at the moment. Now, as I said, I want to be really careful with this because I'm not intimately involved. I'm just seeing and reading and talking with pharmacists in Australia at the moment, and there's a lot of emotion attached to this at the moment because if you've invested in a pharmacy in Australia, if you've got loans, if you've got costs of doing business, and now you're hearing that potentially there's $170,000 cost impost on your pharmacy here in Australia, how do you actually recover that? How do you recoup that when the bulk of your pharmacy revenue is actually provided by the government PBS program? So now, coming back to your question, is that the pharmacies that adapt, the pharmacies that are willing and open to change, as we've seen in the past, will survive this. The challenge will be for the pharmacy industry to be there and support the pharmacy teams that maybe will struggle in this area. And there will be some, Michael, again, you and I have been around enough to know that. But I think if I come back to your original question, is that whether the change is small, whether it's a change in a week, a change in a month, a change over a year, the pharmacy industry has continued to evolve for longer than I've been alive, and I dare say, therefore, longer than you've been alive, because you're younger than me. And it will, but ultimately, it will be the pharmacies that adapt and change within that. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like in a minute. But that would be my overarching point there.
Yeah, and I think adaptability is a great word for it. And I know we'll talk more about this particular issue later, but I think we both know that every crisis generates new opportunities. So if you could name maybe one or two key emerging growth areas or some untapped opportunities within the Australian retail pharmacy sector, what would they be, just off the top of your head?
Yeah, look, and again, you did prompt me with this question, so Michael, and I have been pondering it for a little bit of time. Look, I'm going to say here, for anyone listening, I'm not going to sit here and say there's a magic bullet, because I don't think in this instance there is. I think individual pharmacists, individual pharmacy teams can do things collectively. But again, whether it was the introduction of generics a couple of years ago, or whether it's the current change for the 60-day prescription, there's no magic bullet here. So what I am going to suggest is that, look, of the 6,000 pharmacies around Australia, over a 20-year period, and having travelled around Australia substantially, I've possibly interacted inside a physical pharmacy with more than 1,000 of them. So I've got a reasonably good kind of breadth of experience and knowledge from that perspective. In terms of individual pharmacists and pharmacy teams, I've probably interacted at conferences, APPs, with over 50% of the Australian pharmacy arena, and still fairly well known from that perspective. If I had to say a pharmacy that stands out above all of that, would be pharmacies that specialise in a particular area. And I might be going to be a little bit controversial here, because the reality is pharmacy is heavily dictated to by, obviously, the government PBS revenue program, healthcare program, but it's also heavily dictated to by the supply chain as well. And at the end of the day, here in Australia, you get your stock that you can get, basically, and unless you want to actually start importing your own product, which a few pharmacists over time have done, you've got two fairly substantial parameters that you've got to operate within. Now, if you take that as the base or the core platform or program, which is dispensing and pharmacy-only medicines example being, then what else can you do? And I think rather than give you a magic bullet, what I'm going to suggest to you is that the successful pharmacies that I've seen are the ones that don't try to be everything to everyone. So if you're part of a brand, if you're part of a group, and I don't necessarily mean being part of a group, it may not be a national group, it might be just your own group of pharmacies, you might be a group of 4 or 5, okay? If you wanted to ask me who was a successful pharmacy, then I would suggest it's the ones that specialise in a particular area and do it really, really well. And I want to throw another, I guess, scenario at you, is that, we go to an APP conference, which you and I are going to talk a bit later on, and we hear a lot of great information. We hear a lot of great ideas. And too many times I've, caught up with a pharmacist or a pharmacy team after, say, an APP conference and said, okay, what did you get out of it? What have you done? And, it came to the point where people said, look, I really like this idea, and I've come back and I've got one of my team members all pumped up, and they're going to take that one over and they're going to run that for me. And my immediate response would be, okay, that's a great option, but where are you on that? Oh, I don't have to do anything with it now because this person's going to look after it for me. Well, ultimately, Michael, that does not work because that person didn't get the motivation. They didn't get the excitement speech. They've all of a sudden now been given another job to do, and it doesn't necessarily work, as you said, unless they've been involved in the journey on the way through. So don't try to be everything to everyone. Don't spread yourself too thin, but more importantly, don't jump into groupthink where an idea might be good, but you're not really passionate about it. Because if you're not passionate about it, if you're not motivated in your own right, and if you're not motivated to motivate the team in your own right, then as we know, there's a lot of great business examples out there that things work, but a lot of business examples out there that things don't work because, again, you've got to have that passion. And I think also, I heard this on quite a few of our podcast guests over the last 2 years, is that quite a few of our guests have said that they've got to where they are today because they've had some failures in some of their ideas as well. So I hope I haven't kind of gone too far off track, but if I bring that back to a point, Michael, it's that be the pharmacist that you are, look after your patients and healthcare and their healthcare that you and your team do. Do that within the parameters, that is the PBS and the supply chain from the wholesalers and the suppliers. But if you're going to do anything outside of that, only do the things that you can be passionate about and that you can actually deliver on. Now, if I give you a reciprocal answer to that, again, I said no magic bullet. Too many pharmacies I visited have leased, retail premises with this great front of shop option. And many of them that I would walk into and visit, these front of shops are empty. There's nothing there. And I ask myself, well, why you're paying rent on these? Now, I can kind of throw some numbers at you. I'm not sure if the numbers are the same where you are in the States, but on average, a dispensary to front of shop ratio here in Australia would be anywhere between, as an average, would be anywhere between 70% dispensary, 30% front of shop. If it's a smaller model, it's probably 80 or 90% dispensary, 10 to 20% front of shop. If you're one of the big brands and the discounting brands, it's possibly more 50-50 and maybe even, I'm not 100% sure what the current price line ratio is, but your price lines are predominantly front of shop with a dispensary at the back. So again, they could be the reciprocal of that. But if you're an average pharmacy and you're doing 70% dispensary and 30% front of shop, and you've got this big retail presence at the front, which is not full of stock, then that's not specialization. That's actually doing the wrong thing. And to a point, a magic bullet might be is that you condense back your front of shop, find a local barista and put a coffee shop in the front of your pharmacy. Now, that's not a magic bullet, but it's an example that I'm giving you is that don't pay premium rental, space rental on a front of shop that you're actually not getting a return on when the bulk of your business is coming from that professional services area, counter and dispensary.
I think it's great advice, and it may seem like easy things to do, specialization, beware of groupthink, do what you're passionate about, look after your front shop, but very hard to actually execute effectively and consistently.
Agree. So that'll be the main things. But again, in terms of successful pharmacy models out there, in recent times, certainly in Australia, sleep apnea, pharmacies that have focused and specialised on sleep apnea. Again, not just put the display units on the wall and waited for people to come, have actually gone out and developed relationships with specialist doctors around sleep apnea. I will speak specifically here in Victoria. The Victorian government gave some pharmacies the opportunity to be super pharmacies where they trade 24 hours. I think that's a specialisation, and I've certainly spoken to a couple of them where, yes, they get government subsidy for trading the 24 hours, but one of the greatest things that came from my feedback from them was that they would get customers at 2:00 in the morning because mum needs some medicine for the child, and they would then see that mum during the week later on. So to me, that's a specialisation because that pharmacy was there to help that lady when it was absolutely needed, and they've now become loyal to that pharmacy. So the pharmacy has grown exponentially as a result of that. There's a couple of discount models at the moment here in my local town suburb where I live. Pharmacies recently changed from, I'll call it just a professional brand, to a discount model. And I have to say that I actually don't mind the change, because what I saw previously was a pharmacy with a big front of shop that was always half empty. Now, with the discount model, they've gone to the high shelves, the high racks, the tickets all over the place. And, if there's a level of excitement and retail in there for me, and generally, when I drop a script off, which isn't that often, I will have a bit of a wander around the pharmacy. And I can tell you now, more often than not, I will buy something else while I'm there. Whereas in a half-empty front of shop, I wouldn't have. So again, that pharmacy has taken a brand specialization as an opportunity. And I think to all indications, I think they're doing okay. Now, as I said, current situation aside, those pharmacies have adapted to change. They've realised that they need to do something differently, and have taken an option.
Oh, that's interesting. I think we'll definitely touch on discount pharmacy multiple times, I think, if not on this podcast, then in future podcasts, because I definitely have some thoughts on that. But I want to give you an opportunity to take a breath, have a sip of water, and if you want to ask me a question or two, by all means, fire away.
Well, I might, again, for our listeners, just tell a bit of a story. So obviously we commenced this podcast just on 2 years ago because people were stuck at home or stuck in workplaces, and we wanted an opportunity to actually be able to bring to people guests and information about the pharmacy industry that could be of benefit and value. So over the last, 12 months, we've brought on two other hosts, being Kavita Nadan, who you know, and I think this has been where fate's been quite interesting, and pharmacist Chantel Turner is about to launch with us as well. And part of our business strategy for this podcast a year ago was to either, COVID's not really there anymore. Do we still need to do these podcasts? And if we do, then what do we do to actually spice it up a bit? And so part of the business strategy has been to bring in some new hosts. And interestingly enough, I'll often scour through the guests. I'll often scour through the network connections that I've got. And one day I'm saying, we probably need someone with a bit of a global expertise. And whilst you and I had known each other, all of a sudden you popped up on LinkedIn, which kind of piqued my interest a little bit. And I'm thinking maybe. And then whilst I didn't get to attend APP this year, it turns out that you have an interaction with Kavita and Serge from Locomate. And I think, well, if that's not fate, then I'm not sure what is. So on that basis, Michael, welcome to the podcast team. I'm looking forward, post this episode, to listening to some great episodes with yourself, and certainly from a global perspective, the people that you'll bring to the table as well. But now to ask a question. So obviously you got back to Australia this year. You attended APP. What have you found, I guess, in your time back in the States and coming back to APP? What's changed? What's different? What's working? What's not?
Well, I'll also say before I answer that question that, yes, I did meet Kavi and her husband Serge through this podcast. So you may have to add matchmaker to your other list of occupations because we're now in a strategic partnership together. But I think that's, as you said, that's fate. But for APP, yes, I attended this year. It was my first time in almost a decade going to APP. I saw a great many old friends in the industry and, made a couple of new ones. In terms of what was different, I was struck by one big difference. More probably an evolution, I guess, than a difference. It seems that everyone, or a big proportion of the industry, is now affiliated with discounting. A lot of discounters, a lot of new discount brands in the market. I didn't find that necessarily unusual. It's the way the industry has been trending for many years. But it was striking to me that it seems the industry has now decided, if you can't beat them, join them. And they've gone all in on that. And it's interesting, as somebody in the pharmacy industry here in the U.S. or affiliated with the pharmacy industry here, that the U.S. pharmacy industry has made exactly the opposite bet. In the U.S., it's rare to find a discounter in the same mold as a chemist warehouse. Retail pharmacy in the U.S. has focused on convenience rather than discounting for many years now. That's where they've placed their bets. And almost half of all U.S. pharmacies, for example, have a drive-through. And much of their technological adoption has been geared toward greater speed of service and greater efficiency of service rather than lowering prices. So I thought it was interesting to see how much the two industries are sort of moving apart from each other. And I think also the new technologies that are coming into pharmacy and all healthcare, and which will ultimately disrupt the industry. You're talking about things like artificial intelligence, virtual health, precision medicine, expanded clinical services. It seems to me that those programs can't really be deployed effectively in a discount pharmacy setting. Non-discounters really have an inbuilt advantage when it comes to launching these programs if they move fast enough and get to the forefront. So I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to do, as kind of a big prediction, to launch my podcast career, as they say. And I'm going to say that pharmacy in Australia is going to look a lot different in the next 10 years. We're going to start to see, I think, a reversal of this discount pharmacy wave and trend in the marketplace as these new technologies enter and disrupt the industry.
Yeah,
what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I've no doubt that the industry will continue to change. The question on my mind that might be also on some of our listeners' mind is, I don't really have an understanding of the revenue model for pharmacy in the States. So is that similar to what we've got here in Oz, or is it completely different?
It's similar in some facets, and it's different in others. Obviously, in Australia, it's very much based on government remuneration, and that's basically the center of or the revenue streams for Australian pharmacy. In America, it's different because other than sort of Medicare, which is only for seniors here, and Medicaid for sort of the disadvantaged, most of the revenue is driven by health insurers and what we call PBMs, right, who are sort of the middleman, the pharmacy benefit managers between health insurance companies and pharmacies. And I think maybe one day I'll kind of go through all that step by step because it can be quite a complex system. So really what that means overall is that there's a lot more push towards creating new revenue streams, because you can't just rely on the government to remunerate the prescriptions. You have to rely on benefit managers who may or may not actually remunerate at a level, or may drop their levels of reimbursement for different medications. So that it's always constantly changing. So that's why you'll see pharmacies that have huge front shops, your Walgreens and your CVSs. So you talked about that balance between front shop and dispensary. Well, it's very much 90% front shop, 10% dispensary. I would say that's the split, because the pharmacies have to do that. They can't rely on the dispense income because that is much more variable than in Australia. So I think that is the key driver of innovation in the U.S. market, and the key difference between the two markets.
Yeah, no, and I thank you for kind of updating me. I suspected it was something along the lines of that, and I guess ultimately my questioning to you was more, as it was then around that kind of that core pharmacy business here in Australia, is that we're dictated, as I mentioned, so heavily by the PBS and the supply chain, and we are an island nation too. To a point, you're a bigger island nation, but everything that we want is either going to be made here or predominantly be brought into here. So ultimately, if someone doesn't want to bring it in, then we may not see access to it, where you might have a wider access to products, and from that perspective. So thank you for answering that. I guess my next question then for you, which kind of will set the theme for you for your future podcast, is that, well, what do you think outside of the two models that you looked at might also see change for the global pharmacy industry into the future? Because again, obviously interaction between countries, interaction between cultures, the technology is, whilst there are still geographic borders, the reality is that as human beings today, we actually are part of a global society. So what do you think that looks like for the future? And I guess leading into your future podcasts around global.
I'll tell you what, it's a fascinating question about, what does the future of global pharmacy look like? So I'm going to answer that question by maybe telling a story about what a future pharmacy may look like, a future global pharmacy. So let me set the stage for you, Scott. The year is 2038. So we're 15 years in the future. All right. You are sitting down in your home watching, I suppose would be season 51 of Neighbors at this point, when your smartwatch, which is also, by the way, a continuous glucose monitor that takes your blood glucose readings once every second, sounds an alert. It tells you that your glucose levels are abnormal. All right. And your watch can then sync to your electronic medical record, which is up in the cloud. All right. Your watch then pings that medical record, figures out you don't have a history of diabetes, and it generates an AI avatar, which asks you a series of diagnostic questions about how you're feeling. It knows, obviously, your blood glucose levels, and it wants to triage your issue. Do you need to see a doctor immediately or not? The AI avatar decides you need to see a doctor. So it connects you to your doctor via a telehealth platform that's also built into your smartwatch. Your doctor has access to all your vitals because it's all coming through your watch, your blood pressure, your oxygen levels, your blood glucose levels, and she can see your entire medical history. And she makes a preliminary diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. Sorry, Scott. Looks like that you may have early onset of diabetes. She suggests you try a short course of Ozempic, but one that's specifically modified to your unique genetic structure. She'll send that digital prescription to your local pharmacy. The pharmacist will print out your medication on a 3D printer and then does a 15-minute consult with you explaining what your new medication is and how to take it, again, virtually. And then after that, your AI avatar will follow up with diet recommendations. It will schedule you for virtual consultations with a dietitian, a diabetic educator, and also construct a meal plan for you and fill your virtual grocery list with necessary ingredients. So
Cool.
then, one more thing though, because you haven't got your medication yet, your pharmacy is going to send you the Ozempic via drone delivery within the next 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So just as your episode of Neighbors finishes, and before you even get off the couch, you've got your medication. So that, to me, again, trying to prognosticate, is kind of where we're going. I know a lot of it seems very science fiction-y, right? But most of the ingredients of all that are already available. And something like ChatGPT may have seemed like science fiction 10 years ago, right? Because, what are the themes here? We're talking about, the use of data and interoperability, your data going from your watch to your doctor to your pharmacy. We're talking about AI that actually augments care rather than replacing care, right? We're talking about innovation that is centered on the patient and technology that transforms the patient experience, and a virtual care team, which the pharmacist really is the crux of, available 24/7 to you, from the comfort of your home while you're watching Neighbors. So all of this is really the future of global pharmacy, and all those ingredients are available now. They just need to come together.
They're not connected as much as they possibly could be. And I guess, Michael, to a point too, the human race maybe isn't quite ready for it either.
Well, I don't know. It's possible. It's hard to say what you're ready for until it happens. And I think the takeaway is it's going to happen. I think it's inevitable. And these types of disruptions happen at a rapid pace in today's environment. ChatGPT had 100 million users within the first month of launching. I mean, that's the world we live in now. So, we better get ready. And as pharmacists, as professionals in a clinical setting, we need to start getting comfortable with these types of technologies and embracing them. And like I said, as something that augments and helps you do things like provide care, manage chronic diseases, do real-time diagnoses, get those data insights, rather than something that is scary or may put you out of a job.
I get it. And certainly from my technology interest background, all of that's made a lot of sense. To our listeners today, that might scare quite a few people because, what am I investing in today in terms of my pharmacy business? What does it look like and how quickly can it look like that? But again, ultimately, Michael, welcome aboard. But again, it's one of the things I'm looking forward to you and your guests bringing to the table to listen to. So,
thank you so much. Looking forward to it.
Thank you for listening today. Pharmacy View is a technology-focused podcast provided by Melbourne-based business Arian Technologies and Shopfront Solutions. Over the podcast series, our guests include pharmacists, retail managers, wholesalers, suppliers, and industry technology partners. If you would like further information on our podcast series or to participate in one of our episodes, feel free to send me a message or touch base through the Pharmacy View website, pharmacyview.com.au.